Now, Rishi Sunak is under pressure following the loss of two huge Tory majorities in Kingswood and Wellingborough. Both by-elections saw major swings towards Labour and Reform UK.
And the Prime Minister has been accused by members of his own party of giving up, failing to campaign in either constituency before the votes yesterday. Well, we're joined by Conservative Party Chairman Richard Holden. Richard, good for you for coming out and going into bat. You're the Conservative Party Chairman. What else can you do? What is your view of this? Because it's pretty bad, isn't it? Two desperate by-election defeats.
Well, obviously, two very disappointing results for the party overnight. A bit of local context to both of them, though. Obviously, we'd seen in Wellingborough, the MP had been faced a recall petition. And in Kingswood, obviously, the previous Conservative MP had stood down just a few months before what's going to be at the next general election. So, you know, turnout very low in both of them in the 30%. So, you know, but a disappointing night for the Conservative Party.
I mean, was those situations, that local context that you put, was that the reason why Rishi Sunak only sent a letter to the candidate and didn't go there and campaign?
Well, look, I was there 4 times in each of the by-elections over the last few weeks as well.
Which is lovely, but you're not the Prime Minister or the leader of the party, are you?
I'm not, no. And lots of Conservative MPs have been there campaigning too in both of the by-elections as well. So there has been a lot of central support to them as well. What I'd say is that...
But not the Prime Minister. I mean, you know, A, it didn't work because you lost, and B, he didn't go. So can you understand why some of members of your party say he's given up?
Well, that's definitely not the case. In fact, the Prime Minister is very much targeting his time and efforts on trying to really address those big issues that I know people are facing right up and down the country. And one of the big ones of those has been over the last 18 months or so following Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and then those issues we've now seen in the Red Sea and the blocking of the Suez Canal route around inflation, which has been a real issue for families up and down the country. Now, we've made some progress on some of those big issues. We've seen inflation come down from 11.1% to 4%, but we've still got a lot further to go to try and get it to that target rate.
And we're also, as of yesterday, in a recession.
Yes, and you know, and the big issue we've been facing is around inflation, and that feeds through to everything else. Obviously, it feeds through to interest rates, which affect businesses and families with mortgage rates.
Yeah, but we do know the problems of it. I guess what I'm asking is that if he didn't go and campaign in the elections and you lost, he's been focusing on the other issues that you highlighted, and it doesn't look good. You can see how it's pretty grim for Conservative voters at the moment.
Well, what I'd say is that actually, with those other issues I've been talking about around the economy, what we've got to do is get inflation down so we can have sustainable tax cuts. We've started to see some of those come through with that £450 a year tax cut for the average work at the start of the year. Obviously, we want to go further, but we can only do that in a sustainable way with inflation falling. I want the Prime Minister to be focusing on getting inflation down on those big things around the economy, ensuring that we've got the cash coming in for public services as well. And that's what I want him to be focused on. We've still got a long way to go on those issues. You're absolutely right. But I think we've seen some big steps in the right direction. And what I want to see ahead of the general election is concentrating on that, getting that plan across the line and getting inflation down further so we can see interest rates down, and also we can see taxes further reduced sustainably. That's because that's the context I want to be able to see us later this year. Obviously, we've been able to stand behind families during the pandemic and during the energy crisis. I think that's been the right thing to do, but I think now we want to see that clearer direction of travel with that plan the Prime Minister's got there.
Richard Holden, the Prime Minister set out 5 pledges. He's not meeting them, isn't he? We are in a recession. We can't argue with that. You haven't been able to, as you say, stop the boats. We hear this morning that people now have to wait 4 weeks for an NHS appointment with their GP. The fact remains the Conservative government have been in power for nearly 14 years. The game is up, isn't it?
Well, I'd just say, look at what we've done for around, stopping the boats and illegal migration. We've already seen that down by a third. I want to go further, right? I voted for the Rwanda plan to get that proper deterrent in there to say that anybody who comes here illegally will not be able to stay here. That's now going through Parliament, obviously opposed as all of our other measures to tackle illegal immigration have been by the opposition.
A lot of Conservatives actually would say what you're doing there with the Rwanda plan is very conservative. It's completely disrespecting the law. The law and the courts have decided that it's illegal, and now what you are trying to do is overpower that law, is to change that law, and that is not. I thought Conservative policy, the very heart of being Conservative, was to respect the legal system, respect law. A court has decided that it is unsafe to send people to Rwanda, but you're not accepting that. There'll be lots of Conservatives at home going, this isn't the Conservative Party we know.
I think it's very conservative. One of the fundamentals is to have control of our own borders, over our own immigration system. That's what I want to see. I think that's what the overwhelming majority of Conservatives at home or in Parliament want to see as well and across the country. I understand that the Labour Party and the Lib Dems have a different view of that. I get that, but I want to have those strong border controls because I think it's right that we control who comes into our country. When you look at what Labour are offering on the flip side, there's just no plan there. There's no idea of what's going to happen. We've got still those issues of anti-Semitism, which you'll have covered earlier this week, really rife in the Labour Party, which, Keir Starmer tells us Labour have changed, but has it really?
And all those issues who says that you aren't tackling these things is Ben Habib, who we talked to before. He was celebrating his party getting a bigger percentage of the share of the vote. He was standing in Wellingborough and also as well in Kingswood. They were increased to 10%, 30% where he was. He's saying that the Conservative Party is no longer Conservative, and he made two specific points. He said what they would do if they got to power was raise the base rate of income tax from 12,000 to 20,000 and would lower the rate of corporation tax because that's what people in the Conservative Party expect the Conservatives to do, not increase the tax burden. There's a real challenge, isn't there, from the Reform Party for your core members?
Well, look, what Conservatives are doing in government is reducing tax in a sustainable way at the same time as we're reducing inflation, and that's the right way to go about it. If you want to borrow money to do tax cuts, all you're doing is actually putting more taxes on in the future because you're going to pay the debt interest as well. What I'm interested in is delivering in a sustainable way. Look, and I know that Reform, Richard Tice and Ben Habib and others are celebrating. They want to see Conservative MPs lose their seats. They want to see as many Conservative MPs lose as possible because, they're very happy for the Labour Party and Keir Starmer to be in Downing Street. Now, when I talk to Reform voters on the doorstep, as I've done 4 times, as I said, in both Kingswood and in Wellingborough, I think the last thing that most of those people want is to see Keir Starmer in Downing Street, the man who stood by for 4 years while anti-Semitism ripped through the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, says he's changed the Labour Party, but that's clearly not the case now because we've seen those issues around anti-Semitic racism in Labour over the last week.
Let's just pick that up about anti-Semitism then, actually. And if you're going to hold the same standards that you hold as your party to the Labour Party, Boris Johnson wrote a book that said that the Jews run TV stations. He described a character in his book, Sammy Katz, who had a proud nose and curly hair, and painted him as stingy and a snake-like Jewish businessman. Would you say that is anti-Semitic? He went on to become the leader of your party and the Prime Minister.
I think it's very clear what we've seen over the last few weeks.
I'm not asking about the last few weeks. I'm sorry, I don't know whether you just misheard me. I'm asking about Boris Johnson and his allegations. So what would you say about those? Because Rishi Sunak has said recently that he's still open to Boris Johnson playing a part in his government and playing a part in the Conservative Party. So are you going to call out Boris Johnson's remarks as anti-Semitic as well?
What I'd say here is that we've seen in the Labour Party a real issue.
I'm not asking you about the Labour Party. I'm not asking you about the Labour Party.
Straight away.
I'm asking you a really simple question, and I think lots of Jews are watching this will want to get some reassurance. Your Prime Minister...
Let me answer your question.
Go on.
Right, at the last general election, I saw Boris Johnson going up into places like Golders Green, being welcomed by the Jewish community, who are desperate not to see an anti-Semitic Labour Party win the general election.
So how do you explain his comments then?
Wait a second. That's what I saw, right? I saw the Jewish community as absolutely supporting Boris Johnson at the last general election. I think it's totally different circumstances when you're seeing the Labour Party, which has been found legally as an entire party to have broken the law around anti-Semitism over the last few years, and then Keir Starmer comes and says, "Oh, I've changed all of that," and yet a few months ago, in the back rooms in Lancashire, senior Labour figures were all talking in this horrendous way. Nobody in those meetings was calling this out. Labour have had to deselect 2 of their prospective parliamentary candidates
you're happy
because
to
of this.
call out
And I think that's what's
for
important.
speaking in a terribly derogative and anti-Semitic way, but not the former leader of your party. Is that where we are? Is that clear?
I have no idea where these comments are from. All I know is
Well, I'll tell you, it's from a book. It's from a book, and you know, it's a book called 72 Virgins that he wrote. It's from 2004. You'll know about this book. I mean, come on.
So we're talking. So well, I don't, and it's something about 20. You're talking about something from 20 years ago.
So that's
what I'm talking about.
It's fine, is it? If I'd said something racist about the Jewish community 20 years ago, that's all right. It was 20 years ago. It doesn't matter anymore.
What I'm talking about is what's happening now, and that's that Boris Johnson was a Prime Minister at the time who was welcomed by the Jewish community when they were faced with the anti-Semitism.
It's a little bit like saying some of my best friends are Muslim. I hear that all the time. I hear that about race. I've got some of my best friends are black. Some of my best friends are Jewish. It does not excuse making those remarks just because you might have friends from that community.
Anything. I'm not excusing anything. What I'm saying is what were the facts on the ground. It's quite clear that Boris Johnson was welcomed by the Jewish community at the last general election when we were faced with a genuine anti-Semitic issue with the Labour Party, who were found legally culpable by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission for what they did as an institution, right, at the last general election. Now, Keir Starmer says he's changed the Labour Party, but yet we find out that actually not only has he not changed the Labour Party, but that senior figures within it were prepared to just go along with whatever was happening at these meetings behind closed doors. Nobody was calling it out. The Labour Party high command
to be fair to them, I think they did call it out because they dropped him as a candidate.
No, they didn't. In fairness, they didn't drop him as a candidate. In fact, what they did after those first remarks came out is that Keir Starmer stood by him for 24 hours. It was only when he was forced to by other people in the Labour Party to drop him that they dropped him as a
Richard
candidate.
Holden, we'll have to leave it there because we're running out of time. But thanks very much for joining us, and we'll get that Boris Johnson book sent to you. Thanks for joining us this morning.